It happened in the dead of night. The skyline over Doha, usually still and silent, erupted with light. Not from fireworks, but from missiles. Unconfirmed reports flooded in, urgent, chaotic. Strike hits Hamas-linked facility in Qatar. A phrase that just days ago would have seemed unthinkable. Qatar, long viewed as a diplomatic bridge between East and West, suddenly found itself thrust into the center of a widening regional crisis. Panic spread. International outrage followed. And from allies? Silence. Until one voice broke through, Donald J. Trump. At a press conference, the former president's words stirred controversy and speculation. "This never would have happened under my watch," he said, "but Qatar has made its choices, and now the world is watching." What happened that night? Why now? And what does it mean for global diplomacy and for the people caught in the crossfire? This isn't just about one attack. It's about broken trust, geopolitical chess, and the unraveling of alliances in real time. This is the story of the strike that shook an ally. At 2:43 a.m. local time, the first explosion lit up Doha's night sky. Then, a second strike. By sunrise, the footage was everywhere. Smoke rising from West Bay's skyline, ambulances racing toward the diplomatic zone, glass shattered across downtown shops, and a crater where a small office reportedly linked to Palestinian groups once stood. Initial military statements from unnamed sources framed the attack as a precision operation, with claims of no civilian casualties. But Qatari officials called it what it was: a breach of sovereignty, of peace. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs condemned the attack as reckless and escalatory. For Qataris, it was more than an assault. It was an insult. Why would a strike take place on the soil of a U.S. ally, especially one known for mediating between conflicting powers? Speculations swirled. Was this a message from Israel to actors in the region? Was there prior intelligence suggesting high-risk targets? Or was it an act of provocation during delicate negotiations? Satellite data confirmed an unauthorized aircraft entered Qatari airspace for 4 minutes. There was no interception, no immediate military response, just chaos and confusion. In the aftermath, civilians lined up for supplies. Traffic jams flooded evacuation routes. Local schools were suspended. One resident told Al Jazeera, "We've never felt this exposed. This wasn't just about a building. It was about sending a message." The message, it seems, was loud, but the meaning, still debated, and for many in Doha, still feared. Just hours after the strike, Donald Trump posted on Truth Social, "Qatar has played both sides too long. Weak leadership in Washington. This never would have happened before." It was classic Trump, direct, divisive, and widely shared. On cable networks and digital feeds, the message landed like a hammer. Supporters praised him for speaking hard truths. Critics accused him of pouring fuel on a volatile fire. In a follow-up interview, Trump said, "Qatar takes our protection, takes our money, but doesn't align with our values. That has consequences." The remarks, though not an explicit endorsement of the strike, sent a clear signal. But to whom? To voters? To regional actors? Or to the current administration? Trump's words introduced a new political layer, one not rooted in facts but in narrative, that Qatar brought this upon itself, that Biden was to blame, that strength had been replaced with softness. Qatari officials remained quiet, but behind closed doors, diplomats expressed concern that such remarks could embolden further aggression. One thing was clear. Trump wasn't offering solutions. He was defining sides. In a region already strained by conflict, his commentary deepened the divide, and for many in Qatar, it felt like abandonment. With the strike's smoke still hanging over Doha, another cloud formed, this time over Washington. The question wasn't just who launched the attack. It was, did the U.S. know? And if not, why not? Because just 20 miles from the blast site sits Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American military installation in the region. Over 10,000 U.S. personnel, a strategic nerve center, suddenly exposed, vulnerable, caught between two uneasy partners. President Biden's response was muted. "We call for calm. We reaffirm our regional commitments." But in diplomatic circles, the mood was anything but calm. Meetings were hastily convened. State Department calls spanned time zones. Back-channel conversations buzzed between embassies. Qatar demanded answers. Israel offered none publicly, and America tried to juggle both, without tipping either. Meanwhile, protesters gathered outside the U.S. Embassy in Doha. Their message: "Where are you now? Is your silence approval?" It wasn't just a political dilemma, it was a reputational crisis. Was Washington losing control of its alliances? Or worse, losing credibility? Analysts warned, a delayed U.S. reaction could encourage future violations, and a weak stance might push Gulf states toward alternative security alliances, including with China or Russia. This wasn't just about a military base, it was about trust. And trust, once shaken, rarely returns unchanged. Qatar didn't retaliate with force. It responded with strategy. Within hours of the strike, the Foreign Ministry's statement made waves. A breach of sovereignty, a violation of international law. Qatar reserves all rights. But the response stopped short of military escalation. Instead, Qatar shifted the battlefield to diplomacy, behind closed doors. Ambassadors were recalled. High-level visits were postponed. Intelligence sharing paused. Then came the media offensive. Al Jazeera rolled out continuous coverage, interviews with injured civilians, drone footage of damaged buildings, headlines questioning global silence. The message was subtle, but sharp. If Qatar's neutrality could be violated, so could any nation's. Economically, Qatar began reviewing LNG contracts linked to Israeli-affiliated firms. Travel protocols were adjusted, and discussions opened with Turkey, Iran, and other regional players. At the UN, Qatari envoys lobbied for emergency debate, not just about the strike, but about the precedent it sets. One diplomat asked, "If sovereignty means nothing, then what future do smaller nations have?" Within 72 hours, support trickled in. Statements from Germany, France, Malaysia, and South Africa called for independent investigations. In the end, Qatar didn't fire missiles. It fired messages. And in this age, information can move faster and cut deeper than any bomb. Just as tensions began to stabilize, Trump returned to the spotlight. On Fox Business, he declared, "Under my leadership, the Middle East was quieter. Now, chaos. Weakness invites war." He criticized Qatar again, not for hosting Hamas, but for walking a dangerous tightrope. Then he pivoted. Israel had no choice. They acted, and if Biden doesn't respond, more will follow. Again, no mention of Qatari civilians. No reference to the U.S. base. Just praise for action and blame for Biden. Some took his remarks as posturing, others saw them as dangerous signals, emboldening escalation. International voices pushed back. A former EU diplomat said, "Trump's comments aren't just unhelpful, they're destabilizing." Still, his base applauded the tough talk, and the media amplified every soundbite. Meanwhile, Qatar maintained its silence, but sources close to the palace described the rhetoric as hostile interference. This wasn't just a political moment. It was a narrative war, and Trump once again was writing his chapter, loud and unscripted. In contrast to Trump's theatrics, President Biden's approach was quieter, but no less critical. He stood before cameras, flanked by advisors. "We urge all parties to step back, to assess, to prevent escalation." But beneath the calm was a storm of conflicting pressures. From Qatar, an expectation of support, an expectation of accountability. From Israel, a demand for understanding, a warning against abandonment. And from home, voices on the left demanded a clear stance. Voices on the right demanded strength. Biden's team tried to manage all sides. Cables to Doha emphasized alliance. Conversations with Israel urged restraint. And internal memos asked one question: can we afford a rift with either? Analysts warned of fallout. Diplomatic circles whispered of fractures, and everyday citizens in Doha protested in silence, waiting to see if America would speak clearly or let ambiguity define its position. Biden chose the middle path, but in the Middle East, neutrality often comes at a cost. The dust hasn't settled. Not in Gaza, not in Doha, not in Washington. What began as a late-night strike became something much larger: a test of diplomacy, a shock to alliances, a mirror to the world's shifting order. Qatar may be small in size, but its place in global politics is anything but. One strike revealed how fragile peace can be, how easily silence can be mistaken for consent, and how, in the absence of clarity, chaos takes control. This isn't just about missiles, it's about meaning. And as nations choose their words carefully, or choose not to speak at all, the people on the ground are left to pick up the pieces. So we ask, what kind of future are we choosing? One where might defines right, or one where dialogue prevails? Because this story, the strike, the silence, the split, may mark more than a turning point. It may mark the beginning of a new world order.